Hello, everybody, and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. In today's talk, I was going to cover the topic of Aries Constellation, or Mesha Rashi, as it's known as in Sanskrit. And this talk is from a Vedic astrology or Jyotish perspective, so ancient Indian astrology that's more than 5,000 years old. All right, so let's get into it here. If you're new to Vedic astrology or my videos, all of my teaching videos on the subject are in my concepts playlist. They can be found there. And wherever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means I have a teaching video on the topic if you'd like to learn more. Also, my channel is all about playlists. I'm really good about organizing my videos into different playlists so that different topics are easy to learn or find videos for. So, for example, I have other playlists like Constellations or Rashis, which this one would be a part of. And then planets, grahas, and houses, bhavas. So there's plenty to learn there. Also, if you'd like to learn astrology by, looking at famous birth charts, I have a video titled Birth Chart Archive List 2024, where I list all the famous birth charts I've analyzed on the channel, and the video you can find them in. All right, so again, if you're new to Vedic astrology or a beginner, these are additional videos you may want to watch with this one, before this one. Introduction to the constellations or Rashis, constellation or Rashi categories, North, South, and East Indian style plus Western charts, introduction to navigating a birth chart, planet exaltation and debilitation or Ucha Nicha, planet friends and enemies or Mitra Shatru, nakshatras or lunar mansions, the Lagna, also known as the Ascendant, rising sign or first house. And then because we're talking about Aries constellation today, you probably want to look at the video for symbolism of Mars, which rules Aries, also known as Mangal in Sanskrit. So before I get into Aries constellation specifically, I just wanted to say a few words about constellations or Rashis. So the thing is, first of all, constellation is based on fixed stars, which is the system that Vedic astrology is built on. So when you say fixed stars, that means the position of stars you can see with your own eyes. Okay. Now, a constellation is not the same as a sign, even though a lot of us, and myself included, will go back and forth and use that terminology. There's actually a difference. So in this picture you can see here, we have the sun in the center, and then we have the earth kind of revolving around the sun. And around both of them, we have this kind of array of constellations, okay? And Aries is one of them. But the thing is that what happens is that this wheel of constellations, it's called the ecliptic here, it goes around, all the way around, in about a year, almost a year, like a solar year, okay? It's just a little bit off, though, so less than a degree. So what that means is that every solar year, there's a little bit of a slippage, less than a degree slippage between what we call this ecliptic here and the sun's path or the solar calendar. So over hundreds and thousands of years, what's going to happen is you're going to get more of a difference in the degree difference between the solar calendar and the ecliptic. Okay. So at this present moment, there's about a 23.5 degree difference between the constellations, so where the fixed stars are in the sky that you can see with your eyes, and what are called signs in Western astrology. Okay. So that's why when you convert like a Western chart to a Indian style chart or the other way around, that's why, like, if somebody says that they're Scorpio in Western astrology, that may mean that they're actually uh, the sign before, like a Libra in Vedic astrology. Okay, because it's almost like 23.5 degrees is almost a full sign or constellation. Okay, so Western astrology, when they talk about signs, the signs are actually a little bit more symbolic and representative rather than based on constellations, the fixed stars you can see in the sky. Okay, now Vedic astrology again is based on the fixed stars. Okay. So the second thing about constellations or Rashis is that when we're starting to interpret a birth chart, okay, planets are more influential than constellations. So you give more weight to what the planets are doing than the constellations, although constellations are not insignificant at all. Okay. And you can kind of think of this kind of relationship as the planets are the actors and the constellations are the stage. Okay, just so you start to see kind of, what is influencing what. The planets are going to have more influence, but they're both important. Okay. Like if you've ever seen a play, like I remember going to an opera once, and it was a very traditional old opera, hundreds of years old. But then what they did with the stage was they made it like a modern backdrop. The stage was and the clothes were modern, like almost like a West Side Stories 1950s New York scene. So it was like a very different juxtaposition between the visual elements of that opera and the auditory. Okay, so all right, so just a few words again about constellations as background. Okay, now let's get into Aries constellation or Mesha Rashi more specifically. So Aries in Sanskrit is Mesha, and constellation is Rashi in Sanskrit. Okay. So Aries is ruled by the planet Mars. Mars is called Mangal in Sanskrit. Now it's really important to know the qualities of Mars. So if you're not familiar with qualities of Mars and what it represents, then I would check out my Mars symbolism video. But generally speaking, these are some of the qualities. Okay. One, Mars is a fiery planet. So there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of heat, and we would say like Pitta, as far as like Ayurveda is concerned. Ayurveda is traditional Indian medicine. Okay. So when somebody has a lot of Pitta, they tend towards a lot of inflammation, both in the body and also in the mind. So in the mind, they can be very like hot-tempered or angry or irritated or like very goal-oriented, like just a lot of again, transformative energy, but also like goal orientation, that sort of thing. Okay. So Mars also is a courageous planet. It's the one of the rebellious planets, the other one being K2, which is very much like Mars, which I'll mention a little bit more in a minute. Mars is a leadership planet. So the other leadership planet is Sun. They're different though because Sun is more president like in its leadership, and Mars is more like a commander in chief of the army. So Mars is more of a like roll up your sleeves and get down into the nitty gritty, like hands on type leadership. Whereas the president sometimes can be a little bit more of a kind of a figurehead who's can be a figurehead, but also somebody who's even, kind of a little bit above, the commander in chief of the army. Sometimes they can be the same person, right? Depending on date and time of life of the world. But there is that leadership quality of Mars, okay? So as part of that, that fire again um, uh, brings a lot of initiative. It can bring impatience, impulsiveness. Mars is considered to be a very erratic planet, partly because of the way that it moves through the sky. It doesn't have the same sort of more predictable rhythmic pattern of travel through the sky the way other planets do. There's kind of a physicality to Mars in terms of like it represents things like muscles and blood, even. Um, again, like fire in general can be very intense. So there's this intense quality to it. It can be both tamasic and also rajasic. So those are terms from Ayurveda, again, traditional Indian medicine. Rajasic is a term meaning very active and again goal oriented, as opposed to like spiritual. Okay, Mars is not considered a sattvic or spiritual planet. All the planets are spiritual. Okay, it's just like a different kind of level to it, if you will. It can also be a tamasic planet. So a tamasic planet is one that can actually like destroy. So there can be either a goal-oriented and or destructive energy to Mars. Okay. Now, some say Aries is also co-ruled by K2, the south node of the moon. Um, K2 has a very similar energy to Mars, very fiery, courageous, rebellious, impulsive, that sort of thing. But even more so, like it's even like bump it up, you bump Mars up a notch or two. In terms of it's even more unexpected than Mars and also more exaggerated in its qualities. Okay. Um, Aries is a movable fire sign or Chara Agni. Now, any kind of movable sign is going to be one that has a lot of, action to it. Okay. So in this case, since it's a fire sign, it's going to be a lot of action, physical action. So action and movement, as opposed to like a movable air sign, which would be a lot of thought. Okay, a lot of thought somebody would have. Um, Also, as part of any kind of movable sign, it also means that there's going to be like it can indicate things that are mineral or non-sentient. Okay, so like if, and I'll talk about this more, is that Aries can represent different like places and different things besides people. Um, and so like minerals and non-sentient things can be represented by Aries, as opposed to like sentient beings or animals or that sort of plants, that sort of thing. Okay. Now, the symbol of Aries is a ram. You can see the picture here of these two like rams going at each other, butting heads. Um, so it's quite that's what Aries folks, if you're especially if you're an Aries rising, that's kind of what they're known for. They're kind of known for being taking all this fiery energy, being quite aggressive in a lot of ways. And that's, aggression is not always like a bad thing. There's initiative. Like if you're totally passive and sitting on your couch and you don't have enough fire to get up and go, I don't know, even take a walk or something like that, then that's probably somebody who needs more fire. But again, Aries is a movable fire sign, so a lot of action, a lot of movement, and they can be impulsive. So with these two rams, the reason why I chose this photo here, is that this is kind of uh, can be exaggerated, but maybe not always exaggerated visual for the energy of Aries. So, like the big horns on the ram's head, like there's a lot of energy there. And again, they can go like head to head. And sometimes that's what you need from somebody who's going to, have the courage and initiative to go head to head with other people. Okay. Um, whether for better or worse. Okay. So these are folks, again, especially Aries rising people. They can run headfirst into situations and obstacles both. Okay, they may be somebody who like acts first, thinks later, that kind of thing. Can be depending on other things going on in the chart. This is a blanket generalization for Aries. Okay, and also what is the strength or condition of Mars in the chart? That's going to tell you a lot too. Of like, are they more fiery, or maybe they're balanced with other planets or other energies, that sort of thing. Okay. Now, also of note here is that in Aries, the Aries is the occultation sign for the sun. And as I already mentioned, the sun is another leadership planet. So because sun is so strong in Aries, again, it lends towards, or it kind of indicates that there's like a natural inclination to lead and fight. Okay, because again, they're both fiery planets and both leadership planets. Now, Aries is the debilitation sign for Saturn. So Saturn is about longevity, it's about antiquity, it's about steadiness, it's about structure. So the thing is that Aries rising people, generally speaking, not true for all, there's always exceptions, will be better at like, and more known for, have more of a propensity for starting things, leading things, but they may not always have endurance. Okay. Unless maybe their Mars and Saturn are, in the same sign, or they're mutually aspecting each other, something like that. Okay. In which case I've mentioned many times in my videos, is that when you get Mars and Saturn together, you get the initiative with the endurance. And then you can often get somebody who's like a workaholic, or like an athlete, or somebody who has the initiative and endurance both. Okay. Now there are almost three nakshatras in Aries, and nakshatras, if you're not familiar, are lunar mansions. There are 27 lunar mansions. Every night the moon goes through another nakshatra, and each nakshatra has a different energy to it. Um, and so there's almost three. It's like 2 3/4 of a nakshatra in Aries. The first one is Ashwini. That's symbolized by the Kumara twins, who are like the celestial healers, and they ride horses. So there's this like riding horses rescuing energy, which fits with this Aries fiery energy. Okay. Then the second nakshatra is Bharani. Bharani is symbolized by a womb, and Bharani often is involved with like different cycles of life and death, and also like with the womb, like when you give birth to a baby, it's like there's a death of the old identity, birth of the new identity. It can, be blood and fluid and all this kind of stuff. So again, the Bharani nakshatra energy coincides with a lot of this fieriness that Aries brings. Okay. And then the third nakshatra in Aries, or most of it, there's 3 out of 4 padas. Each nakshatra is divided into 4 padas. So 3 out of 4, most of Kritika is in Aries. Kritika is symbolized by Kartikeya, who's the commander in chief of the celestial army. So again, we're getting this like fiery military commander in chief energy. Although Kritika is a dual nakshatra, so you have this Kartikeya commander in chief energy, but you also have like a foster mother energy because Kartikeya was raised by several foster mothers. Even though that foster mother energy is not often talked about with Kritika. And even the symbol of Kritika is like a sharp instrument, like a knife or something like that. So you can see all 3 of these nakshatras, have this kind of like action oriented, dramatic, intense. I mean, none of these are soft and gentle, easygoing nakshatras. So again, that's just kind of more another level of Aries constellation. Now, if we're looking at Aries in kind of a more personal way, like if we were looking at a birth chart for a person and trying to figure out like what they were like. First of all, again, Aries, Mesha is the first constellation of the zodiac, and the number 1 here, that's an odd number. And so all the odd numbered constellations are considered more of a masculine type energy. Can be cruel, can be rough. These kind of all go together, and they don't necessarily have to be literal here, okay? But it's kind of more of that kind of fighting, analytical, logical type energy, okay? Um, if somebody has like an Aries rising, then they often, in terms of height, they will often be short. Now, again, that depends on other things in their chart, okay? In terms of their bodily constitution or dosha, and again, this gets back to Ayurveda, they are pitta in nature or fiery nature, so inflammation, generally speaking, all kinds of inflammation in the body, but also the mind, like a very hot-tempered, irritated, go-getter type mind, for better or worse, right? In terms of bodily parts, the top and the back of the head, because the first house of any chart, regardless of whether it's an Aries rising or not, the first house especially represents the head. It represents the whole body generally, but especially the head. Now, also in terms of health, things that Aries represents, and again, some of this is going to overlap with Mars because Aries is ruled by Mars, but we can see head and brain, okay? Infection. There's going to be usually inflammation involved with infection, rupture, accidents, injuries, because again, there's this like breaking, those are like usually violent actions or violent events. There can be bleeding involved there. So that's all Martian type stuff. Wounds and surgery, even if it's like a scheduled event, surgery in many ways can be seen as quite violent. I mean, maybe less so now with like laparoscopic surgery and stuff like that, but still, you're using knives and, lasers and stuff to get through tissue and sew together tissue. Um, so there's sharp instruments and fire and transformation involved there. Then inflammation generally, again, all that pitta fire stuff. In terms of like skin, you might see things like acne, boils, rashes, and stuff. Epilepsy and hemorrhage can be part of it. Hernia, so again, a rupture in the normal integrity of tissue. Migraines and a lot of headaches in general, not all headaches, but a lot of like, especially migraines tend to be very inflammatory in nature. Like there's an inflammation of the vasculature of the head, and so that's part of what causes migraines. And then, also like in terms of personality, because again, Aries is the first house of the natural zodiac. The natural zodiac is where you take the first constellation of Aries and put it in the first house. The first house represents for everybody the body, but also the mind and the psychology. So, with all this fiery stuff going on here, Aries people, generally speaking, tend to be extroverted. Okay. And they don't all have to be, but even if they don't open their mouth, share things with you, there's a lot going on under the hood of the car. Let's put it that way. So there can also be, things related to psychology here because personality is also something represented by the first house. Now, Aries is considered to be a barren sign. So when we talk about fruitful and barren, and it doesn't need to be literal, it doesn't mean that all Aries people will not have children. But generally speaking, because they're so fiery, they can kind of burn up their their the tissues that are kind of soft and nurturing and wet because they're like so much fire it can dry them out, like the sperm and the eggs and stuff like that. Because Aries people tend to be, and we'll talk about it soon, tend to be very, again, goal oriented, ambition oriented, or work oriented. And so if they spend all their energy doing that, um, they may not. Again, they might kind of burn out their tissues, and again, this might be energetically, maybe more literally. And so they may not always, they may be interested in children, but they may not always have them, or there may be issues with having them. Can be. Not all the time. Again, it depends on the whole chart, but it just as a first pass categorization. And this is true for, I think, all the fire signs. Because again, all that fieriness it's like when the sun is out and there's no shade and no water, all that sun can dry out the land and create a desert. And then it's hard for things to grow unless some water or shade or something comes along. Okay? And this is kind of an extension of Aries or Mesha is in kind of a personal way, understanding Aries or Mesha in a personal way. This slide is more specifically about Aries or Mesha as a Lagna or Ascendant rising sign first house. Right. Now, on the right side here, I have a North Indian style chart. That's the kind of chart I use in my work, if you're not familiar. So at the top diamond in the middle here, that's all kind of yellowish gold color. This is the rising sign for a North Indian style chart. Okay, the rising sign is also known as the Ascendant, first house, and Lagna. Those are all different names for the same thing. And the Lagna is really important because it sets the tone for the rest of the chart. Okay, now there's a little 1 in the bottom corner here. That little 1 in the corner represents the constellation. And since Aries is the first constellation, that means this is a Aries rising chart. The little 1 in the corner, though, does not represent the first house, even though this is the first house. It'll always be the first house because of the position in a North Indian style chart. The number in the corner represents the zodiac sign or constellation. Okay. So let's just talk about Aries or Mesha Lagna chart here. So Mars not only rules the first house, but it rules the 8th house as well. Okay, and the 8th house is also related to accidents, injuries, and psychology. So again, both houses that Mars rules relates to both of these big categories. Okay. Now, in the 5th house of an Aries Lagna, okay, the 5th house represents things like the intellect. This is going to be the sun, and since sun is so strong in Aries, that means the 5th house is going to be strong. It's also going to be fiery. So this is somebody who's going to have a lot of rapid thoughts and insights, but they might also be impatient and frustrated because everybody is not as fast as they are mentally, physically, either just not keeping up with them. They're just like snap to it. Then Mars as a planet is exalted in the 10th house, which in an Aries rising chart will be Capricorn or Makara in Sanskrit. So because Mars is so strong in the 10th house is going to be like their wheelhouse, essentially. Like they're going to focus on work, achievement, ambition, especially because they're so fiery in nature. Okay. Now, oppositely, Mars is debilitated in the 4th house, which is Cancer or Karka in a Aries rising chart. So, what does the 4th house represent? Well, it represents home and mother. So, there can be Aries people have a tendency, not always, to have a hard time settling down. Or, again, depending on the whole chart, but typically there will be instability at home and also possibly instability with mother. Because those are two big things that the 4th house represents. Okay. Then another big kind of bucket sort of generalization for Aries rising people is that Mercury, which is the enemy of Aries, or the enemy of Mars, rules both the third house of siblings and the sixth house of enemies. And so those two houses will be a bit weaker, besides the fact that that'll also make Mercury pure temporal malefic. So, meaning that a planet owns two negative houses in a chart, or all negative houses in a chart. Okay, so Aries people, rising folks, and sibling rivalry happens a lot, but it might be even more prolonged, more intense, more, more than the average, because of the situation of Mercury being an enemy to Mars. Okay. Now, I did pull out from the Brihat Parashara, which is an old, text, one of the ancient Shastra texts for Jyotish Vedic Astrology, just to see what they had to say. And I also pulled out a description of an Aries rising person from the Phaladipika, which is a newer, I mean, it's still old, but it's more modern than the Brihat Parashara. Okay. Just to see what they had to say. Now, some of this stuff is very literal, and you won't always see all these literal things because, again, it depends on the condition of Mars. It depends on what planets are aspecting Lagna, that sort of thing. But generally speaking, these are things you might expect. And you can see that these correspond with a lot of the fiery qualities we've talked about in the previous slide. So, like in the Brihat Parashara Hora, they talk about a red complexion. So again, the first house represents especially the face and the head. So if you have all this like fieriness, you might have somebody with like a red complexion. They might also have a larger, bulky body. I'm guessing, I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing this might be because Martian people tend to be muscular, as Mars represents muscles. Okay. Strong at night, and I don't know why this is, but this is on the list, so you have it too. Rajasic, and that again is that goal orientation, always moving, always striving ambition, so that fits. And then somebody who wanders. So again, part of this is that erratic quality of the way Mars moves through the sky compared to other planets, and part of it is because Mars is debilitated in the fourth house of home. So they may again tend to wander, you know. Then from the Phaladipika, Aries rising might have round eyes. I don't know. Weak knees. Possibly, I mean, knees is the 10th house. So I'm not exactly sure why, because Mars is exalted there. But maybe because the 10th house is owned by Saturn, and Saturn is, again, debilitated in Aries. So it's a little bit of a roundabout there. Aggressive temperament. Well, we've been talking about that. Afraid of water. I'm not sure why. Active and always moving, that's the same. Limbs bruised. So again, bruising is bleeding beneath the surface. So why would the limbs be bruised? Well, usually accident, injury, fighting, that sort of thing. Eat sparingly. I'm not sure why. Maybe because they're always moving. That can be true. I see that with some of my patients. Like some people, like if they're very fiery and they're so gore-oriented, like they'll skip lunch or they'll skip dinner or breakfast or whatever because they jump to work rather than support themselves with food. Passionate, yeah, that's Aries and Mars, and then speak falsehoods. Well, why speak falsehoods? Well, Mars can represent thieves. Okay, and speak specifically. This might have to do with Mercury because Mercury represents speech, and Mercury's an enemy to Mars, and Mercury's again pure temporal malefic in this chart. So when you have, I've mentioned this before, when you have Mars and Mercury together somewhere in a chart, that can, not always, but it can represent like a liar's combination because Mars represents thief and Mercury represents both the logical mind, analytical mind, but also speech. So it's kind of like stealing somebody's mind or stealing somebody's truth or withholding the truth so that somebody makes a decision based off of faulty or incomplete information, if that makes sense. So it's like stealing, like mental theft. Yeah. So you can see, so even though some of these, texts here are like, hundreds of years, if not thousands of years old, There's a lot of confluence here. I mean, some of these, things, I don't know. I guess I haven't asked enough Aries people if they have weak knees or round eyes, but or they're afraid of water. But maybe if you did the, I guess the research on research enough Aries rising, you would find that was true. But you can see a lot of this again. It all correlates with each other. Okay, and then Aries Mesha. So if we take this a little bit further out to more of like an environmental perspective on Aries, because again, like for example, if we were looking at the fourth house for somebody and their fourth house was Aries, okay, this might be somebody who, and you can see places is listed here. Places for Aries are like forest plateau, newly developed land, sandy, hilly, unfrequented. So again, rebellious, pioneer energy, dangerous, right? So that's all the courage you need to go to dangerous places, furnaces, or any sort of fire type, adjacent type areas, because again, Aries is so fiery. Ceilings and roofs, not sure why. East wall, well, because east is a direction that Aries represents. Also, rich in natural jewels and minerals. This is because Mars represents chemistry. So, if we're talking about jewels and minerals, those are all basically chemical elements, crystallized. And then any sort of mid level point in building. Okay. So, you can see from this picture, we got lots of hills and it looks pretty sandy here. This is a very, Aries type of landscape. So again, getting back to the example I started with, is that if somebody had Aries in their fourth house, which would mean that they were let me go backwards, Pisces, a Capricorn rising, right? Yeah, they would be a Capricorn rising. Their fourth house is going to be Aries. They might have a tendency to live in hilly, sandy places or dangerous places or kind of isolated places or, that sort of thing. Mhm. So I think I sort of jumped to the end here. Let me go back and make sure I cover everything on the slide. So the element here is fire, which we've been talking about. That's nothing new. The direction is east for Aries if you're looking at a chart to determine direction. Now, this first part here is method of rising. And it says back rising or prishtadaya. What does it mean? Well, what that means is, so the different constellations, they're rising in the east. And that's what the rising sign is. And some of the constellations that rise, they go kind of head first, if you will. So, like Aries, if it was a head rising type sign, you would see the horns coming up over the horizon before you saw the back portion of the ram. But Aries is kind of oriented the other way. So when Aries rises in the sky, that means that the hind end of the ram is coming up over the horizon, and the last thing you see rising is the horns. Okay, so what is this? Why is this important? Why do we care about this? Well, this method of rising, back rising constellations are considered inauspicious. And why are they inauspicious? Well, what this means is there's this kind of like, because it's a back rising and not so like it's a little bit like that mental theft, a little bit. Like it's a little bit deviant or not straightforward or that sort of thing. So when you have, and again, not just Mesha or Aries here, but when you have a back rising constellation, this can kind of amplify the negative qualities of malefic planets and diminish the benefic quality of benefic planets. Okay. So again, this is a subtle detail here you don't hear about too much. But like if you're on the fence, because if there's a lot going on, and if you're on the fence of, is this going to go in a positive direction or negative direction, this detail here of knowing that Aries is a back rising constellation may sway you one way or the other. Sometimes it's like, it's like just like a hair difference. And it might be the method of rising is that hair that decides what the true interpretation of a chart is. Okay. So yeah, environmental perspective on Aries. Okay, so there you go, an introduction to Aries Constellation, Mesha Rashi. As always, I want to thank you for your time listening to one of my talks. All my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology are my concepts playlist. They can be found there. If you're looking for famous birth charts that I've analyzed, if you check out my birth chart archive list 2024 video, you can find a list of all of them there. For personal birth chart readings, if you're interested in them, I do them. And I do them live on Zoom and as pre-recorded video. If that's of interest, you can email heartlight@yahoo.com for more info there. I have another YouTube channel on natural medicine where I talk about Ayurveda, which I've talked about a little bit about here. Ayurveda is traditional Indian medicine, another Vedic art. I also talk about yoga and homeopathy and naturopathic medicine. So different paradigms of natural medicine. The name of that natural medicine channel is Nature Source Care, so that's out there too. And always, I just want to thank everybody for your support of my work and the channel and all the different ways that you do that. They're all very meaningful to me, whether it's liking videos or subscribing or sharing videos or sending in donations, um, posting comments. All of it's very much appreciated. So thank you for all of that. All right. So as always, I hope you found this talk helpful, useful, and interesting to you as you learn to navigate the energy cycles of your own life. All right. So until the next one, take good care. Namaste.